In this lesson, we're going to be looking at more ways to do some program analysis. I'm going to start under Linux here, and there's a couple of utilities it's worth knowing about. strace, which is going to trace the system calls that are used with this particular program that I'm going to run. So this is sometimes useful to see what's going on inside the program. This is one way of doing some static analysis and a little bit of dynamic analysis in terms of the different system calls. Now I can do the same thing with library calls. So we've got system calls and library calls, and I'm going to use ltrace, and in this case there's not really much. There's malloc and strncopy, and that's really all that's involved in this particular program from a library perspective. So a couple of different ways you can see what's going on the Linux side. I'm going to look at a couple of others on the Windows side now. The first thing I've got here is the Process Explorer. And the Process Explorer shows me all of the processes. It's kind of a more detailed version of the Task Manager, and it provides me a lot of really useful information. So it shows me the process as well as the process ID and the amount of CPU that's being used, as well as the amount of memory. You can see when I run my mouse over one of the processes, it shows me the command line as well as the path to that particular executable. So that's useful to have. Now, if I were to just double click this, I would get a property sheet with a lot of useful information as well. So I've got my parent process ID here on the bottom of the page. I've got the user that it's being run as well as the date and time that it started, and you can see that it's a 64-bit image. I've got some performance statistics, so it shows me the CPU priority, the kernel time, the user time, the total time. Information about virtual memory and physical memory, as well as I/O information, the reads and writes, and the number of bytes that are involved in both. A performance graph, I've got the disk and network, so I can see how much network it's used. I've got a graph for the graphical processing unit, and I can see here the number of threads that are involved. So I've got 3 threads for this particular one, and it shows me what the start address of the particular thread, as well as the thread ID. I can also see these individual thread IDs. It shows me the number of cycles and context switches, all sorts of useful information about what's going on in the CPU. I can see information about TCP/IP, so there's a local address and a remote address associated with connections here. And then I've got some security information. There are different settings and privileges here. And I've got my environment variables. And also this will show you all of the strings that are stored in this particular binary or executable. So you can see there's a lot of information here in Process Explorer, and you can do a lot of digging with the different processes to see what they're doing and what they're involved with. Now I've got another one here called Process Monitor. Process Monitor is in some ways a little bit like strace. I can see the process name, and I can see the operations that the process name has done while this has been running. So I can see this prl_cc.exe. It's done several operations, and these are like library or system call operations. So I've got a notify change directory, a create file, and I've got several of those. I've got a registry open key on behalf of explorer.exe, and it shows you the key that it's opening. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the detail about it. Query name and query handle tags. So I've got registry opens and registry closes and registry queries. I've got read files. It tells me the offset in the file as well as the file length and the I/O flags. I've got more registry information and registry querying going on by Explorer there. And we're back to prl_cc. It's doing a query information volume. So you can see all of the different operations that are running on your system. And if you want to get really detailed information, you can look at this process monitor, and here's where I can actually get the stack trace, and it shows you the module that was involved for a particular call and the location and the address. So again, if you're doing some analysis on malware or just executables in general, here's some different tools that you can use. We looked at ltrace and strace on the Linux side, and on the Windows side, you can use Process Monitor, and you can also use Process Explorer. One of the other functions of Process Monitor is I can enable boot logging. So if I turn this enable boot logging on when I boot up the next time, it will generate a dump of all of the things that were involved in the boot, and that can help you find bootloader viruses and bootloader malware. So lots of really useful tools for getting a lot of really detailed information.